The elderly woman froze mid-step on the sidewalk, her coffee cup slipping from trembling fingers as she stared at the massive German Shepherd collapsed outside Millbrook Elementary. What she saw wasn't just another stray dog. It was a creature so grotesquely disfigured by the tumor consuming half its face that children were screaming and parents were pulling them away in horror. The military dog tag, still hanging from his matted collar, caught the morning sunlight like a desperate plea for recognition. Behind the crowd of horrified onlookers, someone was already dialing animal control while others filmed with their phones, transforming a dying veteran into viral entertainment. Dorothy Thompson's weathered hands shook as she recognized something achingly familiar in the dog's remaining eye. The same haunted look she'd seen in countless soldiers' faces during her 40 years as a military nurse. The same look her late husband had carried home from Vietnam. "Dear God," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside the suffering animal. "What have we done to you?" But time was running out, and she could hear the sirens approaching. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years ago, Max had been the pride of the Denver Police K-9 unit, a German shepherd whose intelligence and unwavering loyalty had made him a legend among his fellow officers. His handler, Sergeant Rick Henderson, used to joke that Max could read minds and predict trouble before it happened. Together, they'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where Max's keen nose had saved 17 soldiers from roadside bombs, earning him a Purple Heart and the respect of every man and woman in uniform. But that was before the shrapnel tore through his face during their final mission, before the military doctors said the surgery was too expensive for a dog nearing retirement, before Rick's PTSD consumed him, and he made the decision that would haunt him for 3 years running. Now, Max survived in the industrial district on the outskirts of town, a ghost of his former self. The tumor had grown from that untreated wound, transforming the once proud service dog into something that made children scream and adults cross the street. His left eye was completely obscured, his jaw distorted, but somehow his right eye still held that sharp intelligence that had made him legendary. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had built her veterinary practice on second chances, though lately it felt like she was running out of them herself. At 40, the widow struggled to keep her clinic afloat while raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma alone. Sarah had once dreamed of becoming a pediatric surgeon, but life had other plans. Her husband's death in a car accident 2 years ago had left her drowning in medical bills and Emma's autism therapy costs. Watching her dreams slip away, one unpaid invoice at a time, Emma was unlike most children her age. The car accident that took her father had stolen her voice too. Not literally, but she'd stopped speaking to strangers entirely, retreating into a world of intricate drawings featuring animals with missing parts, dogs without eyes, cats without legs, birds with broken wings. Her therapist called it her way of processing trauma, but Sarah worried it was something deeper. In a house across town, Dorothy "Dottie" Thompson sat at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of medical bills and her dwindling bank account. At 72, the retired military nurse lived on a fixed income that seemed to shrink every month. Her children had moved to opposite coasts, leaving her alone in a house that felt too big and too quiet. She'd buried her husband 5 years ago, and some days the silence was so deafening she found herself talking to his photograph just to hear a human voice. The neighborhood had become her purpose. As the unofficial captain of the local watch, Dottie knew everyone's business, everyone's struggles. She'd seen the stray German shepherd wandering the industrial district, always keeping his distance, never aggressive despite his frightening appearance. Something about him reminded her of the wounded soldiers she'd tended to during her 4 decades in military hospitals, broken but not beaten, damaged but still dignified. None of them knew that fate was about to weave their lives together in ways they couldn't imagine, Monday morning started like any other day in Millbrook until Dorothy Thompson's routine walk to the corner market became the catalyst that would divide an entire community. She found Max collapsed on the sidewalk outside the elementary school, his breathing labored and the tumor on his face bleeding from what looked like fresh injuries, rocks thrown by frightened passers-by who saw only a monster, not a suffering soul. The first child to spot him was 6-year-old Lucy Martinez, whose piercing scream brought teachers running from the playground. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered, parents pulling their children close while others fumbled for their phones. The videos started immediately. Shaky footage of the grotesque German shepherd, his face so distorted by the massive growth that he barely looked canine anymore. "Oh my God, what is that thing?" gasped Jennifer Walsh, clutching her kindergartner tight. "Someone call animal control before it attacks someone." But Dorothy saw something different. Kneeling beside Max, she noticed how he tried to lift his head when children cried, his remaining eye filled not with aggression but with concern. His tail gave a weak wag when she spoke softly, and despite his pain, he attempted to move away from the crowd, protecting them from his frightening appearance. "Easy, boy," she whispered, recognizing the dog tag that read K9 Max Denver PD. "You're one of ours, aren't you?" The situation escalated when Principal Harris arrived and immediately called for the school to go into soft lockdown. Parents began arriving to pick up their children, and someone had already posted a video to Facebook with the caption, "Dangerous Stray Terrorizes Millbrook Elementary." Within an hour, it had been shared 300 times, each share adding more inflammatory comments about public safety and irresponsible pet ownership. Dorothy's hands shook as she dialed Dr. Mitchell's clinic, knowing she was probably the only veterinarian in town who might consider helping an animal this far gone. The conversation was brief and discouraging. Sarah explained that without at least $15,000 up front, she couldn't even begin to assess what kind of surgery might be possible, if any. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but cases like this, they rarely end well, and the cost—" "Just come look at him," Dorothy interrupted. "Please, there's something special about this dog." When the animal control truck arrived, Officer Pete Hendricks took one look at Max and shook his head. "Ma'am, this animal is suffering. The humane thing to do is put him down right now." "Over my dead body," Dorothy snapped, positioning herself between Max and the officer. At 72, she might have been frail, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 4 decades in military hospitals. "This dog has a service record. He's earned better than a needle in a parking lot." The crowd was growing, and opinions were splitting sharply. The Martinez family started a petition demanding immediate euthanasia for public safety. But when Mrs. Chen, the school librarian, shared Dorothy's discovery about Max's service record on the community Facebook page, the narrative began to shift. Local veteran Robert Shaw arrived within 20 minutes, took one look at Max's condition, and immediately started making phone calls. "This is Staff Sergeant Maxwell, K9 Unit," he announced to the crowd, reading from his phone. "Served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 17 confirmed saves of American personnel, recipient of the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in action." His voice cracked slightly. "He's not a stray. He's a war veteran." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathering crowd. Some parents looked ashamed of their earlier reactions, while others doubled down on their concerns about public safety. The Martinez family's petition was quickly countered by another demanding proper medical care for a military hero. By noon, 3 local news stations had arrived. The story was already trending on social media under #SaveMaxTheHero, but equally strong was the counter-narrative. Public safety first. The community was fracturing along ideological lines, those who saw Max as a veteran deserving honor, and those who saw him as a dangerous animal whose suffering should be ended mercifully. Emma Mitchell saw the viral video during her lunch break at school, watching through the window as her teachers scrolled through Facebook. The little girl hadn't spoken to anyone outside her family in months, but something about the German Shepherd's remaining eye called to her. When her mother arrived to pick her up early, Emma spoke her first words to a stranger since her father's death. "Mrs. Anderson," she said to her teacher, her voice barely above a whisper. "That doggy needs help." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her daughter, who hadn't spoken to outsiders since the trauma of losing her father, was breaking her silence for a dying dog she'd never met. As they drove home, Emma stared out the window and whispered something that made Sarah's hands tremble on the steering wheel. "Mama, that doggy looks like me feels inside." Tuesday evening brought the first major turning point when Dorothy's research into Max's service record led her to a name she hadn't expected to find. Sergeant Rick Henderson, listed as Max's final handler before discharge. A few phone calls to veteran contacts revealed Rick was still in town, working security at a local warehouse and struggling with demons of his own. Sarah was closing her clinic when the commotion started outside. Through her window, she watched a man stumbling across the parking lot toward the temporary shelter they'd set up for Max in her clinic's back room. Even in the dim light, she could tell he was intoxicated, and the way he moved suggested barely controlled rage. "Where is he?" Rick's voice slurred as he banged on the clinic door. "Where's that damn dog?" Sarah cautiously opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Sir, we're closed. If you need emergency services..." I don't need services. I need to see Max." Rick's eyes were bloodshot, his breath reeking of alcohol. "I need to finish what I should have done 3 years ago." The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. She'd heard about the online threats, the angry comments demanding Max's euthanization, but this felt different, more personal. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead." Rick laughed bitterly. "Tell them Rick Henderson is here to visit his old partner. Tell them I came to put my dog out of his misery." Behind the clinic, Max had heard the familiar voice. Despite his weakness, he struggled to his feet, his tail wagging frantically. The sound of his whimpering carried through the thin walls, and Rick's composure cracked entirely. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, pressing his forehead against the door. "He still remembers me." When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found Rick sitting in his truck, sobbing into his hands while Max whined pitifully from inside the clinic. Officer Martinez approached carefully, recognizing the signs of a veteran in crisis. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." "You don't understand," Rick said, his voice breaking. "I left him when he got hurt. When the military said the surgery was too expensive, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't watch another friend die because of that war." The full story came out in the police station interview room. Rick had returned from Afghanistan with severe PTSD, unable to cope with crowds, loud noises, or reminders of combat. When Max was injured in their final mission and the military veterinarians quoted a $20,000 surgery estimate, Rick had been faced with an impossible choice: drain his disability benefits trying to save Max, or accept the military's recommendation for euthanization. "I took the coward's way out," Rick confessed to Officer Martinez. "I signed the papers releasing him to a civilian shelter, told myself someone else would adopt him, give him a better life. I knew the truth, though. I knew what happens to damaged dogs in shelters." Meanwhile, Dorothy had been doing her own investigation. The military records she'd obtained painted a picture of heroism that made the current situation even more heartbreaking. Max had detected 17 IEDs during his service, saving countless lives. His final mission involved protecting a convoy of medical supplies to a remote outpost when insurgents opened fire. Max had taken shrapnel to the face while continuing to alert soldiers to hidden explosives, refusing to retreat even as blood poured from his wounds. The injury that caused his current tumor had been deemed survivable but cosmetically significant by military veterinarians. The recommended surgery would have saved his eye and prevented the growth, but the cost was deemed excessive for a dog nearing retirement age. Sarah found herself at the center of a growing media storm. By Wednesday morning, her clinic's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, donation offers, and equally passionate demands that she stop prolonging the animal's suffering. The GoFundMe page Dorothy had started was approaching $10,000, but the comments section had become a battlefield. "This is what's wrong with America," read one angry post, "spending thousands on a dog while veterans sleep on the streets." "Max is a veteran," came the reply. "He served his country and deserves our respect." The divide was tearing through families and friendships. At Millbrook Elementary, parents were choosing sides, with some organizing fundraising drives while others demanded the school ban all discussion of Max from classrooms. Emma had become obsessed with the story, checking the GoFundMe page constantly and adding to her collection of drawings featuring Max. Her sketches were remarkably accurate despite never seeing him in person, showing details of his injuries that made Sarah's heart ache. More troubling, Emma had begun referring to Max as Daddy's friend, creating an imaginary connection between her deceased father and the suffering dog. The breakthrough came Wednesday night when Rick, now 3 days sober and out of jail on his own recognizance, appeared at Dorothy's front door. He looked haggard but determined, carrying a folder of documents and a cashier's check. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Rick Henderson. I need to see Max." Dorothy studied his face, seeing the same haunted expression she'd recognized in Max's remaining eye. "You're the one who left him." "Yes, ma'am, and I'm the one who's going to make it right." He held up the check. $25,000. My entire disability settlement. It should cover the surgery and then some. "Money doesn't fix everything, son." "No, ma'am, it doesn't. But it's a start." Rick's voice was steady now, the alcohol-fueled rage replaced by quiet determination. "I let my PTSD make decisions for me 3 years ago. I let my fears hurt the one soul who never judged me, never left my side when I was falling apart. I can't undo that, but I can try to save him now." Dorothy led Rick to Sarah's clinic, where they found the veterinarian still working late, reviewing surgical options with a specialist from Denver. Max was resting in a recovery kennel, his breathing shallow but stable. When Max saw Rick through the kennel door, his reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Despite his weakness, he struggled to his feet, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook. He pressed against the kennel door, whimpering softly, showing no anger or resentment toward the man who had abandoned him. Rick broke down completely, dropping to his knees beside the kennel. "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so damn sorry. I let you down when you needed me most." Sarah watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, understanding for the first time that this wasn't just about saving a dog. This was about redemption, second chances, and the kind of unconditional love that both Max and Rick desperately needed. "The surgery is scheduled for Saturday," she told Rick quietly. "But I have to warn you, his condition has deteriorated significantly. Even with the best surgical team, his chances are maybe 60%. Rick nodded, his hand pressed against the kennel as Max nuzzled his fingers through the wire. "He's a fighter. Always has been. If anyone can beat the odds, it's Max." Thursday morning brought an unexpected complication that threatened to derail everything they'd worked toward. A well-dressed woman in her 50s appeared at Sarah's clinic, claiming to be Max's rightful owner, producing what appeared to be official adoption papers dated 6 months ago. "I'm Linda Kozloff," she announced to the gathering crowd of reporters. This dog was legally surrendered to my rescue organization. Any medical procedures performed without my consent constitute theft of property." The documents looked legitimate enough to cause immediate legal concerns. Sarah's hands trembled as she examined the paperwork, knowing that any delay could be fatal for Max. His condition had worsened overnight, the tumor pressing against his airway and making breathing increasingly difficult. Dorothy wasn't buying it. "Funny how you show up just when donations hit $30,000, she said, her nurse's instincts detecting deception. "Where have you been for 3 years while this dog suffered on the streets?" The legal challenge created chaos just as Emma arrived with Sarah for what had become her daily visit with Max. The 8-year-old had been making remarkable progress, speaking more each day as her connection with the suffering dog deepened. But seeing strangers arguing over Max's fate triggered something in her that nobody expected. "Stop fighting!" Emma's voice cut through the adult arguments like a blade. It was the loudest she'd spoken in public since her father's death, and everyone in the clinic fell silent. "Max doesn't belong to papers. He belongs to people who love him." The child's outburst attracted the attention of the news crews, and within hours, footage of Emma defending Max had gone viral. The video showed a small girl with tears streaming down her face, standing protectively near Max's kennel while adults argued around her. Social media exploded with support for the brave little girl and her dog. Rick, meanwhile, had spent the night researching Linda Kozlov's organization and discovered troubling connections to commercial breeding operations. A few phone calls to his military contacts revealed that Patriot Paws Rescue was a front for a dogfighting ring that specifically targeted military animals for their training and aggression. "They want Max because of his service record," Rick explained to a hastily assembled group in Dorothy's living room. "Retired military dogs bring premium prices in the fighting circuit. His injuries make him perfect for training younger dogs." The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Parents who had been divided over Max's fate now united against the external threat. The school board, which had initially called for his removal, passed an emergency resolution supporting his medical treatment. Even former opponents like the Martinez family joined the growing defense of Max. Sarah threw herself into preparing for Saturday's surgery, assembling a volunteer team of specialists who had offered their services free of charge. Dr. Robert Chen, a renowned veterinary oncologist from Denver, would lead the tumor removal. Dr. Maria Santos, a military veterinary surgeon, would handle the reconstructive work. The surgery would be complicated, lasting potentially 8 hours and requiring precise coordination. Emma's breakthrough with public speaking had an unexpected side effect. Her autism, which had always made social situations difficult, seemed to become less of a barrier when she was advocating for Max. Child psychologist Dr. Jennifer Walsh noted that Emma's selective mutism was resolving through her emotional connection to the dog's suffering. "She's found her voice because she found something worth speaking for," Dr. Walsh explained to Sarah. "Max has given her a purpose that transcends her own trauma." Friday brought both hope and new challenges. The legal issues with Linda Kozlov were resolved when police discovered her rescue papers were forged, but her appearance had highlighted the national attention Max's story was receiving. 3 major news networks sent crews to cover the surgery, and the GoFundMe total had reached $47,000. Rick's sobriety was holding strong, but the pressure was enormous. He'd moved into Dorothy's spare room to be close to Max, spending hours talking to the dog about their shared experiences in Afghanistan. The conversations were therapeutic for both of them, with Max seeming to respond to familiar military terminology and Rick finding peace in the dog's unwavering forgiveness. "You remember that night in Kandahar when the rockets came in?" Rick would whisper through the kennel bars. "You stayed calm while everyone else was losing their minds. I need that strength from you now, partner." Dorothy had become the unofficial coordinator of what was now being called Operation Save Max. Her house served as headquarters for volunteers, donation sorting, and media coordination. At 72, she was busier than she'd been in years, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt truly alive. The community transformation was remarkable. Businesses that had initially opposed the waste of resources were now donating supplies and services. Millbrook Elementary had turned Max's story into a lesson about service, sacrifice, and second chances. Children who had been frightened by his appearance now drew pictures of him as a superhero. Friday evening brought a moment of crisis that tested everyone's resolve. Max suffered what appeared to be a seizure, his body convulsing as the tumor's pressure on his brain stem increased. Sarah worked frantically to stabilize him while Emma watched in terror, convinced she was about to lose another loved one. "Is he dying like Daddy did?" Emma asked, her voice small and scared. Sarah couldn't lie to her daughter. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to fight for him just like he fought for all those soldiers." The seizure passed, but it had pushed Max's surgery from elective to emergency status. The team would need to operate Saturday morning or risk losing him entirely. The pressure was now on Dr. Chen and his team to perform what had become more than a medical procedure. It was a community's test of faith and second chances. Rick spent Friday night in vigil beside Max's kennel, sharing stories of their service together and making promises about the life they'd have if the surgery succeeded. He spoke about the therapy dog program he wanted to start for veterans, with Max as the lead counselor. He talked about the house he'd buy with a big yard and the children they'd help heal together. Emma had her own conversation with Max, whispering about her father and how Max reminded her that love doesn't end when someone gets hurt or sick. She promised to learn sign language so she could help other children who had trouble speaking, inspired by Max's silent communication and infinite patience. Sarah found herself working through her own grief as she prepared for the surgery. Saving Max had become about more than veterinary medicine. It was about proving that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. Her husband had died despite the best medical care available, but Max still had a chance. The pre-surgical blood work revealed additional complications. Max's kidney function was compromised, likely from 3 years of poor nutrition and untreated infections. The anesthesia risk was now significantly higher, but postponing surgery was no longer an option. "So we're looking at maybe 40% survival odds," Dr. Chen told the assembled team Friday night. "But this dog has beaten worse odds before." Dorothy organized a prayer vigil for Friday night with over 200 people gathering in the park across from the clinic. Veterans, families, children, and even some former opponents joined together in support. Emma spoke to the crowd, her voice clear and strong despite her youth. "Max taught me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless," she said. "Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. Tomorrow, we're going to help Max be beautiful again." The vigil lasted until dawn, with volunteers maintaining a constant presence. Local restaurants donated food, the fire department provided lighting, and the police blocked traffic to ensure safety. What had started as a medical emergency had become a community-wide demonstration of faith, hope, and the power of collective love. As Saturday morning approached, everyone involved understood that they were about to witness something far more significant than a surgical procedure. They were going to discover whether a community's love could overcome the cruelest circumstances, whether second chances were real, and whether the bond between humans and animals could truly heal the deepest wounds. The surgery was scheduled for 7 a.m., and Max would either emerge as a testament to the power of compassion or become a martyr for the cause of treating all living beings with dignity and respect. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of an entire community's hopes resting on the surgical table in Sarah's clinic. By 6 a.m., over 300 people had gathered outside, creating an impromptu prayer circle that stretched around the entire block. Local news crews broadcast live updates while volunteers distributed coffee and breakfast to the vigil keepers who had maintained their watch through the night. Inside the clinic, Dr. Chen and his team made final preparations while Max lay sedated, his breathing assisted by a ventilator. The tumor had grown visibly overnight, distorting his face even further and making the surgery exponentially more dangerous. Sarah's hands trembled as she checked his vital signs one last time before the procedure began. "His heart rate is elevated but stable," she reported to the surgical team. "Blood pressure is concerning but within acceptable parameters for surgery." Emma had insisted on saying goodbye before the anesthesia took full effect. She leaned close to Max's ear, whispering words that made every adult in the room fight back tears. "Remember what Daddy used to tell me when I was scared? Brave hearts beat strongest in the dark. Your heart is the bravest I know, Max." The surgery began at exactly 7:15 a.m., with Dr. Chen making the initial incision around the massive tumor. What they discovered inside was far worse than anyone had anticipated. The growth had wrapped itself around critical facial nerves and blood vessels, creating a complex web that would require millimeter-precise removal to preserve any chance of normal function. "Jesus," Dr. Santos whispered, studying the exposed tissue, "this thing is like a biological puzzle. One wrong cut and we could cause permanent paralysis or massive hemorrhaging." 2 hours into the procedure, they encountered the first major complication. The tumor had grown into Max's eye socket, fusing with the bone structure in a way that made complete removal impossible without destroying his remaining vision. Dr. Chen faced an agonizing decision: attempt complete removal and risk blinding Max entirely, or leave small portions of the growth that could regenerate. Outside, the waiting crowd had grown to over 500 people. Rick paced the parking lot like a caged animal, his 3 days of sobriety tested by the stress of not knowing whether his partner would survive the procedure he'd funded. Dorothy led the crowd in hymns her late husband had loved, her voice carrying across the morning air with surprising strength for someone her age. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me," she sang, the words taking on new meaning as they applied to both Max's situation and the community's transformation. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." At the 4-hour mark, disaster struck. Dr. Chen was carefully separating the tumor from a critical blood vessel when Max's blood pressure spiked suddenly, causing massive bleeding that filled the surgical field with blood. Alarms began sounding as his heart rate became dangerously irregular. "We're losing him," Dr. Santos called out, immediately beginning cardiac massage while Sarah rushed to administer emergency medications. "Heart rate dropping fast. We need to get this bleeding under control or he's not going to make it." The next 30 minutes became a desperate fight for Max's life. The surgical team worked with the precision of a military unit, each member knowing their role in the life-or-death struggle playing out on the table. Dr. Sichen's hands moved with surgeon's grace, tying off bleeding vessels while maintaining the delicate work of tumor removal. "Got it," he finally announced, successfully controlling the hemorrhaging. "But we've got a new problem. The bleeding damaged some of the facial nerves we were trying to preserve. Even if he survives, there's going to be permanent paralysis on the left side of his face." Outside, the crowd sensed something was wrong when Sarah emerged briefly to update Rick and Dorothy. Her scrubs were blood-stained, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. The information she shared sent ripples of concern through the gathering. "There have been complications," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the morning traffic. "The surgery is taking longer than expected and Max has suffered some setbacks. We need everyone to keep hoping and praying." Emma's reaction was immediate and devastating. The 8-year-old collapsed into tears, convinced that she was about to lose Max just like she'd lost her father. Her autism made processing the uncertainty especially difficult, and she began rocking back and forth while repeating, "Don't let him die, don't let him die, don't let him die." Rick knelt beside Emma, his own tears flowing freely as he tried to comfort the child who had become like a daughter to him over the past week. "Max is the strongest dog I know," he told her. "He survived bombs and bullets in Afghanistan. He's not going to give up on us now." The surgery entered its 6th hour with the tumor finally removed, but Max's condition remaining critical. The shrapnel extraction proved even more challenging than anticipated, requiring microsurgery to remove metal fragments that had migrated dangerously close to his brainstem. One piece was so close to critical tissue that attempting removal could cause instant death. "We leave it, Doctor," Chen decided after consulting with the team. "The risk is too great. It's been there for 3 years without causing fatal damage. We'll monitor it and hope it doesn't shift." As the surgical team began the reconstruction phase, Max's body suffered another crisis. His breathing became labored, even with ventilator assistance, and his blood oxygen levels dropped precipitously. Dr. Santos discovered that swelling from the surgery was putting pressure on his airway, requiring an emergency tracheostomy to keep him alive. "We're going to have to create an opening in his throat," she explained to Sarah during a brief break. "It's the only way to ensure he can breathe during recovery. He'll have a permanent scar, but he'll be alive." The tracheostomy procedure added another hour to the surgery, bringing the total time to 7 hours. Outside, the vigil had taken on an almost sacred quality. Children drew chalk pictures on the sidewalk. Elderly veterans shared stories of their own service dogs, and families who had never spoken before found common ground in their concern for Max. Local radio stations had picked up the story, providing hourly updates to listeners across the region. The hashtag #SaveMaxTheHero was trending nationally, with supporters sharing their own stories of rescue animals and second chances. The outpouring of love and support was unprecedented for such a small community. At the 8-hour mark, Dr. Chen finally emerged from surgery, his scrubs soaked with sweat and blood. The crowd fell silent as he approached Rick, Dorothy, and Emma, his expression unreadable after the marathon procedure. "The surgery is complete," he announced, his voice hoarse from hours of concentration. "We successfully removed approximately 90% of the tumor and all accessible shrapnel. Max is alive, but the next 48 hours will be critical." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Dr. Chen raised his hand for silence. "I need you all to understand that Max has a long recovery ahead. There's permanent damage to the left side of his face. He'll have vision problems, and he may never look like the dog he was before. But he's alive, and with time, love, and rehabilitation, he can have a good quality of life." Rick broke down completely at the news, 3 years of guilt and grief pouring out in heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Dorothy wrapped her arms around him while Emma clung to both of them, creating a picture of surrogate family bonded by their shared love for a broken dog. "Can we see him?" Emma asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Not yet, sweetheart," Dr. Chen replied gently. "He's still unconscious from the anesthesia, and we need to monitor him closely. But if all goes well, you should be able to visit him tomorrow." As the crowd began to disperse, many people lingered, reluctant to leave, while Max's fate still hung in the balance. The surgical team remained on high alert, knowing that post-operative complications could still claim his life even after surviving the procedure itself. Sarah finally allowed herself to feel a moment of hope as she watched Max's vital signs stabilize in the recovery room. The dog who had brought her community together was fighting for his life with the same determination he'd shown in Afghanistan, proving once again that heroes come in many forms. The real test, however, was just beginning. Sunday morning brought the devastating news that shattered every hope they had carefully built over the past week. Dr. Chen's expression was grim as he gathered the core group, Sarah, Rick, Dorothy, and Emma, in the clinic's small conference room. Max had survived the surgery, but the post-operative scans revealed a truth that made the successful tumor removal feel like a cruel joke. "The remaining shrapnel has shifted," Dr. Chen explained, pointing to the X-ray images displayed on his laptop. "During the surgery, the vibrations and manipulation caused a fragment to migrate. It's now pressing directly against his brainstem. He has maybe 48 hours before the pressure causes irreversible damage or death." Emma's face went white as she processed the words. After everything they'd been through, after the community coming together, after Max surviving an 8-hour surgery, it might all be for nothing. "But you fixed him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You said you fixed him." "We fixed what we could see," Dr. Chen said gently. "But this piece of metal has been moving through his system for 3 years. The surgery disturbed its position, and now it's in the most dangerous possible location." Rick slammed his fist against the wall, his newfound sobriety tested by this cosmic cruelty. "So what are you saying? After everything, we're just supposed to watch him die?" "There's one option," Dr. Chen continued reluctantly. "Brain surgery to remove the fragment. But I have to be honest with you. The success rate for this type of procedure in dogs is less than 10%. And even if he survives, there's a 90% chance of permanent brain damage, paralysis, or worse." Sarah felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her. As Max's attending veterinarian, the choice would ultimately be hers to make, but she couldn't bear the responsibility alone. Outside, the news media and supporters were still celebrating Saturday's successful surgery, unaware that their hero was facing an even deadlier threat. Dorothy's voice cut through the silence with the wisdom of her 72 years. "What would Max choose if he could tell us?" It was Rick who answered, his voice broken by grief and guilt. "Max never quit on a mission. Never. Even when he was bleeding. Even when he was scared, he kept going until the job was done." He looked at Emma, whose tears were falling silently. "But this isn't about what Max would choose. This is about what's right for him." The ethical dilemma tore at everyone's hearts. Was it merciful to end Max's suffering now while he was unconscious and pain-free? Or was it their obligation to fight for him the way he'd fought for others, regardless of the odds? Emma's autism made processing this new crisis especially difficult. She began rocking back and forth, a behavior that had diminished since meeting Max, but now returned with intensity. "He can't die," she repeated over and over. "He can't die like Daddy. I can't lose someone else I love." The child's breakdown forced Sarah to confront her own trauma. She'd been using Max's situation to process her husband's death, seeing in the dog's fight for survival a chance to save someone this time. But was she projecting her own need for healing onto an animal who might be suffering needlessly? Word of Max's deteriorating condition leaked to the media by Sunday afternoon, creating a new wave of anguish in the community that had invested so much emotionally in his recovery. The GoFundMe page, which had reached $53,000, was flooded with new donations from people desperate to help, even though money couldn't solve this particular problem. The debate that erupted online was fierce and painful. Animal rights activists argued that subjecting Max to another surgery would be torture disguised as compassion. Veterans groups insisted that Max deserved every possible chance at life, just as human soldiers would receive. Religious communities were divided between those who saw euthanasia as a mercy and those who viewed it as giving up on God's plan. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Emma's child psychologist, arrived Sunday evening to help the family process this new trauma. She found Emma sitting beside Max's recovery kennel, talking to the unconscious dog about her father's death and her fears of abandonment. When Daddy got hurt in the car, the doctor said they could save him, Emma told Max through the kennel bars. But they couldn't. And then he was gone forever, and I couldn't talk to anyone because words just hurt too much. You made me remember that talking can help people. But now you might go away too, Doctor. Walsh recognized that Emma's attachment to Max had become a crucial part of her psychological healing, but also a potential source of re-traumatization if he died. The child had transferred her grief for her father onto her hope for Max's recovery, creating a dangerous emotional dependency. Rick's reaction to the news was perhaps the most devastating of all. 3 years of guilt over abandoning Max had driven him to alcoholism and near suicide. Now, just as he'd found hope for redemption through Max's recovery, that hope was being stripped away by forces beyond anyone's control. "I did this to him," Rick confessed to Dorothy as they sat in her kitchen Sunday night. "If I'd gotten him proper treatment 3 years ago, that shrapnel never would have moved. Every day I waited, every day I let him suffer on the streets, I was killing him slowly." Dorothy had seen enough guilt and grief in her decades as a military nurse to recognize the dangerous spiral Rick was entering. "Son, you can't take responsibility for every bad thing that happens. Sometimes life just breaks things, and all we can do is love them while we have them." The night brought no peace for any of them. Sarah lay awake, calculating and recalculating the surgical risks, wondering if her ego was preventing her from making the merciful choice. Emma had nightmares about losing both her father and Max, waking up screaming about everyone leaving. Meanwhile, Max himself remained unconscious, his body fighting battles they couldn't see while machines monitored his vital signs. His breathing was becoming more labored, and subtle changes in his brain activity suggested the pressure was increasing exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted. Monday morning's consultation with the neurological specialist confirmed everyone's worst fears. Dr. Patricia Ramirez, the state's leading veterinary neurosurgeon, reviewed Max's scans and delivered a verdict that felt like a death sentence. "The fragment is in the worst possible position," she explained. "Even if we attempt surgery and succeed in removing it, the brain damage would likely leave him in a vegetative state. He would be alive, but he wouldn't be Max anymore." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everything they'd fought for, everything the community had rallied around, was crumbling into dust. The heroic narrative of Max's recovery was becoming a tragedy of good intentions and impossible circumstances. Emma's response was to stop speaking again entirely, retreating into the silence that had protected her after her father's death. She sat beside Max's kennel, holding his paw through the bars, her eyes empty of the hope that had sustained her through the previous week. Dr. Chen recommended they have until Tuesday morning to make a final decision. After that, Max's condition would deteriorate beyond any possibility of recovery, making euthanasia the only humane option. The 48 hours they'd been given had become 24, and time was running out faster than anyone could bear. As Monday evening approached, the weight of the decision felt unbearable. They had saved Max from the tumor only to discover that salvation had doomed him to an even crueler fate. The community that had united in hope was now faced with the reality that sometimes love means letting go, even when every fiber of your being wants to keep fighting. The question that tormented everyone was whether they were about to witness the ultimate triumph of love over adversity or learn the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, despite our best efforts and deepest love, we cannot save the ones who matter most. Tuesday morning was coming, and with it a choice that would define not just Max's fate, but the hearts of everyone who had dared to believe in miracles. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of finality, but it was Emma who provided the catalyst for the most shocking revelation of all. At 6 a.m., as the adults prepared for what they believed would be Max's final hours, the 8-year-old girl did something that changed everything. She began singing the same lullaby her father used to sing to her during thunderstorms, her small voice carrying through the clinic's recovery room. "Hush now, my angel, don't you cry. Daddy's here to sing you by. Close your eyes and dream of light. Everything will be all right." Max's response was immediate and miraculous. His remaining eye opened for the first time since surgery, focusing directly on Emma's face. His tail, which hadn't moved in days, gave a weak but unmistakable wag. Dr. Chen rushed to check his vital signs and found something that defied medical explanation. Max's brain activity had suddenly normalized. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen whispered, staring at the monitors. "His intracranial pressure has dropped significantly. The swelling around the shrapnel has reduced by 40% in the last hour." But Emma wasn't finished with her revelations. Still singing softly to Max, she began to speak in a way that made every adult in the room freeze with shock. "Max, I know you remember Daddy. He told me he met you at the veteran hospital before I was born. He said you were the bravest dog he ever saw." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Emma, sweetheart, what are you talking about?" "Daddy's journal," Emma said simply, still focused on Max. "The one Mommy keeps in the bedroom closet. He wrote about meeting a German shepherd with a face injury who saved soldiers in Afghanistan. He wrote about wanting to adopt him someday." Sarah's hands shook as the implications hit her. Her husband David had worked as a trauma counselor at the Denver Veterans Hospital before Emma was born. He'd mentioned a special therapy dog program, but had never given details. With trembling fingers, she called Dorothy and asked her to retrieve David's journal from their bedroom. What Dorothy found in the leather-bound journal sent shockwaves through everyone present. Entry after entry detailed David's interactions with military dogs at the VA hospital, including detailed descriptions of one particular German shepherd who had been brought in for psychological evaluation after his handler's breakdown. "November 15th, 3 years ago," Dorothy read aloud, her voice breaking. "Met the most extraordinary dog today. Max, a Purple Heart recipient with severe facial trauma from shrapnel. His handler, Rick Henderson, is struggling with PTSD and considering surrendering him. I've never seen such intelligence and empathy in an animal. He seems to understand human pain better than most humans do." The journal entries continued, revealing that David had been working with military veterinarians to develop a treatment plan for Max when Rick made the decision to surrender him. The final entry was dated the day before David's fatal car accident. "I'm driving to meet Dr. Sarah Mitchell tomorrow to discuss Max's case. She's a veterinarian who specializes in trauma recovery, and I think she might be willing to take on Max's rehabilitation. I have a feeling this dog could help Sarah's daughter, Emma, who's been so quiet since starting school. Sometimes broken souls find each other." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her husband had been driving to meet her about Max when the accident occurred. The dog she'd been fighting to save was the same animal her husband had died trying to help. Emma's inexplicable connection to Max suddenly made perfect sense. Somehow, through her father's work, their destinies had always been intertwined. Rick's reaction was equally devastating. "David Mitchell. I remember him. He was the counselor who tried to help me deal with my PTSD. He kept telling me that Max could be part of therapy programs, that surrendering him was a mistake." Rick's voice cracked. "If I'd listened to him, if I'd trusted him, none of this would have happened." But the most shocking twist was yet to come. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly reviewing Max's latest brain scans, made a discovery that challenged everything they thought they knew about his condition. The shrapnel fragment that appeared to be pressing against his brainstem was actually in a completely different position than the previous day's scans had shown. "I need to check something," Dr. Chen said, pulling up the original X-rays from 3 years ago. After several minutes of careful comparison, he looked up with an expression of complete bewilderment. "The shrapnel hasn't moved toward his brain. It's moved away from it." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, afraid to hope. "It means Max's body has been slowly encapsulating the metal fragments in scar tissue, pushing them away from vital organs. What we interpreted as dangerous migration was actually his body's natural healing process finally completing itself. The surgery trauma accelerated this process rather than hindering it." The medical revelation was staggering. Max wasn't dying from surgical complications. He was finally healing from wounds that had been festering for 3 years. The tumor removal had allowed his body's natural defenses to function properly, literally pushing the remaining shrapnel into safe positions where it could remain indefinitely without causing harm. Emma's response to this news was perhaps the most moving of all. Still holding Max's paw through the kennel bars, she looked directly at Dr. Chen and spoke with clarity that stunned everyone. "Daddy always said that love was the best medicine. He was right, wasn't he?" The transformation in Max's condition over the next few hours was remarkable. His breathing improved dramatically, his neurological responses returned to normal, and by afternoon he was attempting to lift his head and look around the recovery room. The dog that everyone had been preparing to euthanize was showing clear signs of recovery beyond anything they'd dared to imagine. Rick spent the afternoon sitting beside Max's kennel, finally able to have the conversation he'd needed for 3 years. "I'm sorry I left you, partner. I'm sorry I let my own demons hurt you, but I promise you this, I'm never walking away again. We're going to finish this mission together." Dorothy organized an impromptu prayer of thanksgiving that evening, with over 100 community members gathering in the park to celebrate Max's miraculous recovery. The crowd that had been preparing for a funeral was now rejoicing in what could only be described as a resurrection. But perhaps the most profound change was in Emma herself. Her selective mutism, which had plagued her since her father's death, seemed to dissolve completely as she found her voice through advocating for Max. The connection between her trauma and her healing had come full circle through a dog her father had tried to save. "Daddy sent Max to help us," Emma told the gathering crowd, her voice clear and confident. "He knew we needed each other. Max lost his face but kept his heart. I lost my voice but found it again." Sometimes, broken things fit together better than perfect things ever could. The media coverage of Max's recovery and the revelation about David's connection to his case captured national attention in a way that transcended typical animal rescue stories. This was a tale of destiny, sacrifice, and the mysterious ways that love connects souls across time and circumstance. Dr. Chen began documenting Max's case for medical journals, calling it the most remarkable example of delayed natural healing he'd ever witnessed. The successful surgery, combined with Max's body's own healing mechanisms, had created a perfect storm of recovery that defied conventional veterinary expectations. As Tuesday evening settled into Wednesday morning, Max was moved from critical care to regular recovery, his vital signs stable and his prognosis completely transformed. The dog, who had been hours away from euthanasia, was now expected to make a full recovery, though he would carry the scars of his ordeal for the rest of his life. The revelation that David Mitchell had been instrumental in connecting all their lives created a sense of completion that went beyond medical success. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring together the exact people needed to save not just Max, but each other in the process. Sarah finally understood that saving Max had been about more than veterinary medicine. It had been about honoring her husband's final mission and completing the work he'd died trying to accomplish. Emma had found her voice by speaking for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Rick had found redemption through facing his failures and making amends. Dorothy had found family in the most unexpected places. And Max, the broken warrior who had suffered in silence for 3 years, had become the catalyst for healing an entire community's wounds through the simple power of unconditional love and unwavering hope. 6 months after the surgery that had brought an entire community together, Millbrook had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. The story of Max's recovery had rippled outward, creating changes that touched every aspect of their small town and beyond. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save one suffering dog had evolved into a movement that redefined how they understood family, healing, and the bonds between humans and animals. Max himself had exceeded every medical expectation. His facial scars had healed into distinguished silver lines that somehow made him more handsome rather than less. The partial vision loss in his left eye had barely slowed him down, and he'd learned to navigate the world with the confidence of a dog who knew he was deeply loved. His intelligence, always remarkable, seemed sharpened by his ordeal, as if suffering had refined his ability to understand and respond to human emotions. The transformation was most evident in his new role as Millbrook's first certified therapy dog. Under Rick's careful training, Max had learned to work with veterans suffering from PTSD, children with autism, and elderly residents in nursing homes. His calm presence and intuitive understanding of human pain made him extraordinarily effective at helping others heal from their own traumas. Emma had blossomed in ways that amazed everyone who knew her. The selective mutism that had defined her life since her father's death had completely resolved, replaced by an eloquence that belied her young age. She'd become Max's unofficial spokesperson, traveling to schools across the state to speak about autism acceptance, animal rescue, and the power of not giving up on broken things. "Max taught me that being different doesn't mean being less," she would tell audiences of children and adults alike. "His face looks different now, but his heart is exactly the same." Sometimes the most beautiful souls come in packages that don't look perfect on the outside. Sarah's veterinary practice had evolved far beyond what she'd ever dreamed possible. The success of Max's surgery and the media attention it generated had brought her opportunities she'd never imagined. She'd received a federal grant to establish the first regional center for military animal rehabilitation, turning her small clinic into a state-of-the-art facility that served veterans' pets from across the western United States. More personally, Sarah had found peace with her husband's death through understanding his connection to Max. David's journal had revealed the depth of his compassion and his vision for using animal therapy to heal human trauma. By saving Max and continuing his work, Sarah felt she was honoring David's memory in the most meaningful way possible. "I used to think I'd failed David by not becoming the pediatric surgeon I'd planned to be," Sarah reflected during a quiet moment in her expanded clinic. "But I realize now that this was always where I was meant to be. David led me here through Max to work that matters more than I ever understood." Rick's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all. 6 months sober and counting, he'd channeled his military discipline and his bond with Max into creating the Henderson Foundation for Military Animal Veterans. The organization worked to reunite service animals with their handlers and provide medical care for retired military dogs who had been abandoned or surrendered. "Max saved my life twice," Rick would tell donors and volunteers. "Once in Afghanistan when he detected that IED, and once here in Millbrook when he gave me a reason to live again. Now we're returning the favor for other dogs and their handlers who need second chances." Rick had moved into a small apartment near Sarah's clinic, allowing him to work closely with Max every day while maintaining his independence. The guilt that had driven him to alcoholism had been replaced by purpose, and his relationship with Max had healed completely, They were partners again, this time in the mission of healing rather than warfare. Dorothy had become the heart of what everyone now called the Max family. At 73, she was busier and happier than she'd been in decades. Her house had become the unofficial headquarters for the therapy dog program, and she'd taken on the role of grandmother to Emma, while serving as a surrogate mother to both Sarah and Rick. "I spent 5 years after my husband died feeling useless," Dorothy would say while preparing dinner for her chosen family. "Max reminded me that love doesn't retire. There's always someone who needs what you have to give, and there's always room in your heart for one more soul to love." The community impact extended far beyond the core group. Millbrook Elementary had integrated Max's story into their curriculum, using it to teach lessons about empathy, perseverance, and the value of all living beings. The school had also established a therapy animal program, with Max visiting weekly to help children with various challenges. Property values in the neighborhood had increased significantly, not due to gentrification, but because of the positive national attention Millbrook had received. Young families were moving to the area specifically because of the community values demonstrated during Max's crisis. The town had become known as a place where neighbors still cared for each other and where second chances were not just possible, but celebrated. The annual Max Day celebration had become Millbrook's largest community event, drawing visitors from across the country. The festival raised funds for animal rescue organizations while celebrating the bonds between humans and their pets. Max served as the grand marshal of the parade, riding in a decorated truck while Emma walked beside him, both of them beaming with pride. Local businesses had embraced the Max story as well. The hardware store displayed a permanent exhibit about his military service. The coffee shop served Max's blend, with proceeds going to veterans organizations. Even the bank had installed a water station for dogs, acknowledging that pets were valued community members. The ripple effects extended to the national level as well. Emma's speeches had inspired similar therapy dog programs in dozens of other communities. The surgical techniques Dr. Chen had developed while treating Max were being studied and replicated at veterinary schools across the country. Rick's foundation had facilitated over 100 military animal adoptions and provided medical care for countless others. Perhaps most significantly, Congress had passed the Military Animal Veterans Act, providing federal funding for the medical care of retired service animals. The legislation was informally known as Max's Law, recognizing the role his story had played in raising awareness about the abandonment of military animals. The personal relationships that had formed during Max's crisis had deepened into bonds that transcended traditional family structures. Emma called Rick Uncle Rick and Dorothy Grandma Dottie. Sarah and Rick had developed a deep friendship based on their shared love for Max and their commitment to his mission. Dorothy had found the family she'd been missing since her children moved away. "Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family," Dorothy would say when people asked about her unusual household arrangements. "Max taught us that families come in all shapes and sizes, and love is what makes them real." The Thanksgiving dinner at Dorothy's house had become legendary in Millbrook. The tables stretched across 2 rooms to accommodate not just the core Max family, but also the volunteers, supporters, and friends who had become part of their extended community. Max held the place of honor, wearing a special vest that read Chief Therapy Officer, while patiently allowing children to pet him and adults to take pictures. Emma's toast that Thanksgiving captured the transformation they'd all experienced. "We're thankful for Max, who taught us that broken doesn't mean worthless. We're thankful for each other, because sometimes families choose you instead of the other way around. And we're thankful for Daddy, who we know is smiling because his plan worked perfectly." The success of Max's recovery and the program it had spawned attracted visits from other communities facing similar challenges. Delegations would come to study how Millbrook had turned a crisis into an opportunity for growth and healing. Sarah, Rick, Dorothy, and Emma had become reluctant celebrities, featured in documentaries and case studies about community resilience. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The military unit Max had served with in Afghanistan made a special trip to Millbrook to present him with a commendation for his continued service in civilian life. The ceremony, held in the park where so many vigils had been held during his surgery, brought dozens of veterans together to honor a dog who had never stopped serving his country. "Max represents the best of military values," the commanding officer said during the presentation. "Courage under fire, loyalty to his unit, and service above self. His work here in Millbrook continues the mission he began overseas, and we're honored to call him our brother." As winter approached, the first winter Max would spend warm and safe and loved, the community reflected on the miraculous year they'd shared. A dog who had been discarded as worthless had become the center of a network of healing that touched hundreds of lives. A little girl who couldn't speak had found her voice. A broken veteran had found redemption. A lonely widow had found family. A struggling single mother had found her calling. The ugly dog with the giant tumor had indeed been chased away. But what happened next had made everyone cry, tears of joy, gratitude, and wonder at the mysterious ways that love transforms broken things into something beautiful. Max's scars remained, but they had become symbols of survival rather than suffering, proof that the most profound healing often comes not from erasing our wounds, but from learning to see them as evidence of our strength. In the end, Max had given them all the greatest gift possible: the understanding that no soul is too broken to love, no creature too damaged to save, and no situation too hopeless for transformation. He had taught them that families are built on love rather than blood, that healing happens in community, and that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come disguised as ordinary acts of compassion. At 72, Dorothy Thompson thought her story was ending. Empty house, distant children, dwindling purpose. Then she found Max, a discarded war hero with a face so disfigured that people crossed streets to avoid him. What happened next proves that our most meaningful chapters often begin when we think the book is closing. Dorothy didn't just save Max, he saved her right back, filling her home with laughter, her days with purpose, and her heart with a family she never expected. Sarah, the struggling single mother, discovered that detours from our original dreams sometimes lead to destinations more beautiful than we imagined. Rick, the guilt-ridden veteran, learned that redemption comes not from erasing our failures, but from using them to fuel our service to others. And little Emma found her voice by speaking for those who couldn't speak for themselves. This isn't just a story about rescuing a dog. It's about how broken souls find each other and create families bound not by blood, but by love, loyalty, and second chances. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen not despite our scars, but because of them. Age doesn't diminish our capacity to love, to heal, or to begin again. It deepens it. What broken thing in your life became a source of unexpected blessing? Have you ever found family in the most surprising places? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how second chances changed your life.